Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, everyone, to the IlmFeed podcast. I'm your host, Shabbir Hassan, and it's great to be back once again. I know we've kind of slowed down with the podcast, but inshallah, we're planning on getting them going again. Today, I'm really excited about the podcast today because I feel like it's going to be one of those really practical ones, inshallah, things that we can really hopefully implement, and something which affects perhaps the most important daily aspect of our lives, our spiritual lives, when it comes to worship and when it comes to our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's salah. It's the prayer. And I know a lot of us, myself included, many of us, if not all of us, it's a struggle that we have. How do I focus? How do I reconnect? How do I get rid of those distractions? Okay, it's a constant improvement. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because we have someone with us, mashallah, who is the founder of a great initiative called Transform My Prayer. I love the name because that's something that we're all trying to do, transform our prayers. And he's also the CEO of National Zakat Foundation, NZF. So we're not talking about zakat today. We're going to be talking about salah, inshallah. So great pleasure to introduce Brother Iqbal Nasim. Salam alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How are you doing, brother? You okay?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, no, thanks for having me on this as well.
Alhamdulillah. No, thank you so much for coming on. And like I mentioned, I mean, obviously, the way I know you over the years is from your work with NZF, right? So all kind of zakat related stuff. So a lot of people would probably, for those of who know you, probably would expect a podcast today on zakat. But actually, like we said, it's another pillar of Islam, which comes slightly before that, which is salah. So I'm going to get straight into it and just ask why did you decide, obviously you're still doing all of your work with NZF, but why did you decide, this is time now to introduce Transform My Prayer, and Salah is something that I need to focus on and do workshops on and classes, etc. What's the journey there?
Sure. Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yeah, in a way, I think in hindsight, it was quite a natural transition. When I over time, it's been now 10 years, coming up to 10 years that I've been at National Zakat Foundation. And, in the midst of that journey, there's been a lot of reflection on, as one should, I suppose, and as one must, reflecting on, well, what exactly am I doing here? What am I trying to achieve? And if, although it sounds obvious, it takes something of a mindset shift, I suppose, and an understanding to realize that when it comes to the handling of zakat, you're first and foremost trying to establish a pillar of Islam, within the community, and obviously with NZF, with its completely local focus within the United Kingdom, as well as in the 4 other countries in which it's now operating. The point is that we're looking at zakat not so much just as a form of charity to deal with, difficulties and problems anywhere, but we're looking at it as a foundation, as a pillar to build a community and a society here. So we're thinking about the future of Islam and Muslims. So for me, that's the concern. The concern is, what is the future of Islam and Muslims, i.e. the future of this phenomenon of people submitting to the creator of the heavens and the earth, and those who do that. And so when you're thinking about zakat in that way, as opposed to simply as just a charity and just providing aid to individuals, then naturally you have to think about it alongside the other foundations, the other aspects upon which this building, I suppose, needs to be built. And so that, I would say, at one level. And at another level, of course, when you look at the Quranic narrative, which is obviously the narrative of the Lord himself, then you notice, of course, that Salah and Zakah come together all the time. So the fact that Salah and Zakah come together all the time also suggests and indicates that there is this kind of natural synergy, specifically between these 2 pillars, that needs to be thought about and focused on. So I thought, okay, well, look, if my interest, or my overarching interest, is not in NZF the brand, it's in establishing this pillar called zakat, then whilst during the course of my NZF journey, whoever I would come across, scholar, imam, whoever, I used to always raise this issue of salah. I would always say, look, do you think that this pillar has been established really? And is it not? I have long thought, for many years, I've long thought that actually we somehow seem to be perhaps assuming or missing, I don't know what, right? But just missing the point that actually this most basic of actions, which is the cornerstone of everything, the foundation of everything, whose importance really cannot be exaggerated. No matter how much how whatever you might say, there's no way to sort of what's the word, hyperbolize, right? How important Salah actually is. It didn't seem to me, in my experience, that it was getting enough attention. And actually, on the ground, you know, based on my anecdotal experience as well as looking at other things, it seemed very clear that actually, yes, this is a clear problem. The average Muslim struggles with both consistency and quality with regards to their 5 daily prayers. So what's happening to deal with that problem? And now it's not that nothing out there exists, but I suppose it didn't feel to me as though there was like a really systematic approach to dealing with this issue, and also something which was kind of focused. Like lots of institutes, might teach all sorts of subjects. Salah will be one of them, typically with a disproportionate focus on the outward elements of Salah, not the inward elements. And, as if it's just one of another whole number of topics we just need to get through. But it's not really that. It's actually something you need to stay with for some time, in my opinion, before you even go on to other things, really. Because until that aspect of one's life is mastered, one could argue that actually attention should be limited in terms of other things and getting to details of all sorts. But this is something that should receive specific focus. So that's why I started, I developed my own kind of course. I mean, informally, we'd just do talks here and there, then developed a course, started teaching that almost 2 years ago now, in November 2019. Alhamdulillah, taught the first course. And then that same course has been taught many times since to, I think, over 1,600 people now, alhamdulillah, around the world. And around 10-15,000 people have, sort of, I suppose, seen webinars or interacted in some like one-off workshops and stuff. So yeah, alhamdulillah, as a sort of I think the modern terminology is like, side hustle, right? This was my side hustle, okay, outside of my left stuff. And for me personally, like it had I think I'm naturally interested in, and I enjoy, thinking and researching on topics and subjects, but then also presenting and educating around them in a way that I hope and I feel is practical, is relevant, and uses a frame of reference that people can relate to. Because I think, frankly, a lot of our quote unquote Islamic studies teaching, if you want to put it that way, is very full of jargon and often presented in a way that people can't properly relate to.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's basically
it's interesting. I mean, I like the wording that you've used, the inward and the outward, because obviously there's no shortage of materials or books or talks or classes on Salah. There's plenty of it out there, because a lot of people, like you said, any typical kind of course that you study, whether it's Alimiya, whatever, full-time, part-time, Salah is always going to be in the curriculum, right? But like you said, I mean, the inward isn't covered as much. It's always about the fiqh. And that's actually one of the things I did want to discuss today as well, was not necessarily the fiqh, but how we focus so much on the fiqh sometimes, which is good. Obviously, you need to know the legalities and so on. But then it kind of takes away from the essence or the substance of the prayer, So there's a lot of focus on all of these things, but then not the inward. So how would we tackle that? I mean, obviously you're tackling it by focusing on these courses, etc. But like the kind of average person out there that's reading books, all of the books are written on, okay, I need to raise my hands to this level or keep my feet apart this level. What would your advice be there?
Look, so I think this is a really important issue, because you can tell a person's concerns, right, by virtue of the questions they ask, right? And so disproportionately on this subject, even after a session in which I might have spoken only about, the kind of what you might call the more substantial inward, elements of the prayer, the first questions are just on some random technicality, which has nothing to do with what we're actually discussing. People are stressed out about getting everything right in this kind of outward sense. Now, the reason why this is significant and important is because what it actually reveals is something about the way in which we've come to conceptualize God. Because we think that it's these minor issues, often minor issues, on the basis of which our prayer is being judged fundamentally. So that tells us something about how we think, like what we think the nature of God is, basically in terms of how he observes and evaluates us. I think that's an important point to understand. So it's a little bit like, one analogy is almost like a, when you're doing sort of like sort of like a basic maths test, for example, right? A kid is doing a basic maths test. It's almost like so like, is it being just evaluated on did you get the right answer or not? And is the pleasure from the fact that, oh, I got the right answer? Or is it, as I try to, do with my own kids, actually to do with the workings and like how you got there, right? Later on, as you go through sort of the education system at a higher and higher level, there's much more focus on like the way of thinking about things, as opposed to and evaluating, as opposed to simply, oh, if you got the right answer, then it's correct. Yeah, it's a little bit like that. So the point is that, how is Allah judging us? Is he judging us like we're doing like a 6-year-old sort of maths test, or is he judging us as, as though we're doing like a PhD in this particular sort of subject, i.e. we can show that we are investing our whole self into this process. So my point is, or the way I get people to try and think about this is to just try and think about the salah as a meeting, right? You think to yourself, look, I have an appointment, right? I've got an appointment with the doctor. I've got an appointment with, some family member. I've got to go and see my friend for dinner. I've got a work call. I've got an appointment with God. Okay. Now, actually, it's very useful to just normalize your salah as just another meeting, which is made special by who you're meeting. But actually, a lot of the principles that you will apply to improving your prayer significantly, all it takes is actually just to see it, just to do the same kind of things and apply a similar kind of etiquette that you would apply to any other meeting, things that we would automatically understand to be like the best way to present yourself and interact in any other setting with somebody else. Actually, just to apply the same level, even if most people could just get to the same standard as they get to everything else, your prayer would be like 10 times better. So I think that to think about it in that way, that it's a personal meeting, right? An interactive meeting with a real being. You're not worshipping some abstract idea. You're presenting yourself in front of a reality, al-haq, Allah is al-haq, right? The real, the true. It's so the problem is that when you have this rules-based theoretical, oftentimes quite, many people I've come across, they say that they associate their negative experiences of prayer today with sort of harsh or tough, sort of traumatic memories of the process of prayer as a child. Perhaps in the madrasa, perhaps at home, whatever it might be. But if you see it, if we can sort of disassociate from that and understand that it's not a performance. It's funny actually, because I think words give away certain things sometimes. We often talk about let's perform salah, but performance is like it's an act. Yeah, no, let's go and let's meet with Allah, let's speak with Allah, let's interact with our Lord. So the point is, when you think about it in that way, it just makes it more natural. So you're more yourself. Okay, so I think the first point is just to how do we frame this whole thing? How am I understanding this? Like, am I seeing it as simply an obligation, something I have to do, and it's correct as long as these technicalities are in order, or is it something which actually I see as a much more natural experience and an interaction in which I'm really trying to communicate something, right? And this, I think, is another key thing, because obviously salah is, primarily it's a communication. I mean, we are speaking, we are saying things from beginning to end. Okay, so how do we communicate? Again, if we see that communication as almost like just sort of parrot style repeating or just reeling off phrases which we don't really understand, all right, and we've memorized, and it's just to get through those phrases and then we're done. Like, think about that. Think about what that says. I mean, the fact that most Muslims, even educated, professional, whatever, right, who have come to just accept, so maybe subconsciously, that that's okay. It's just okay to just turn up, say these things you don't understand, go up and down, and then go off, and then feel like something has been achieved. We need to appreciate that it is far more likely that our salah may not be accepted and may not count for anything on the basis that we did not have presence of mind or presence of heart, than, for example, some particular technicality around exactly where our hands were placed, exactly how we moved our finger for the tashahhud, right? I mean, it's hard to kind of think about the fact that one's going to turn up on the Day of Judgment and then be called up on something like that, rather than, on the other hand, the fact that we weren't fully present. And interestingly, I'll just mention one point here, because it's interesting that actually take one important technicality, which people would associate as a technicality, where there is a lot of discussion around the way in which it invalidates prayer. So, for example, we know that there's a number of prophetic narrations, and I suppose more generally then supported by various Quranic verses as well, that indicates that if a person moves too quickly between the various positions of the prayer, especially going everything that happens between the standing, right, and the prostration. So as you go into the ruku', you go into the bowing, come up, Sami Allahu liman hamdah, go into prostration, come out of prostration, go back into prostration, come up again. So in these sort of movements, this is where actually a lot of people's prayer, this is where it basically fails. Okay. Oh, and the reason it fails is because one has not spent enough time in a particular position, right? So you haven't, to even translate some of the narrations, your backbone has not, become straight, okay, before you move into the next position. But the point is, now one can see that and see, okay, well, that's an outward technicality. One needs to be physically in a particular position before one moves forward. But even the point is, Allah is not dismissing that prayer because you move too fast. And on the outward, all that matters is like, my backbone is straight, almost like 1, 2, 3, and then go back in.
Yeah.
That's not the issue. The issue is because it shows a disrespect and clearly a lack of consciousness of who you're in front of. Because if you really felt Allah's presence before you, there's no way you could move at such a pace. That's the actual point. Yeah. And so even in the famous narration in which the Prophet ﷺ told a companion that go back and pray, you haven't prayed. The point was, be in each of these positions حتى تطمئن راكعا حتى تطمئن, like until you are in a state of tranquility whilst bowing, and whilst you're in a state of tranquility, until you get to a state of tranquility whilst in prostration. Meaning that it's actually, طمأنينة we understand as an internal quality, not an external one. That actually you're at rest. So actually, even if you're still in between positions of the prayer, but you're still on the outside, but you're not actually still on the inside. See, and this is something really important to notice within ourselves. Are we truly at rest in each position before we move into the next position? Or is there something that it's almost like any sound can go and we're moving because we're almost, especially when you're following the imam. It's very common sometimes, for a person, if the imam especially takes just a little bit longer, right, that people are already trying to move into the next position. Imam hasn't said anything. Sound over there, you thought, that's the trigger, you see, because we're not calm. We're not, and that's important because in any activity, the level of your absorption, right, in that particular activity, like you're typically then internally, you're generally then in a kind of sort of a calmer state. It's like you've settled in this interaction. So I think this is the key thing, to try and understand this in just more normal terms. This is a meeting. I'm speaking. I'm actually need to listen as well, which is something else maybe we can talk about. And I'm moving in a way that relates to a real presence, not to like, just either an abstract notion or some rules in a book.
Yeah, interesting. No, I like that. I like the meeting example that you've given, because I think, it kind of reminds me of, it's not exactly the same thing, but it kind of reminds me of, like, you you go to like some masjids, it's quite common now. Actually, I saw it in Jummah just today, and I was like, yeah, there's always like these posters where it says like, turn off your mobile phone, because there's no call that's more important than your call with Allah, that kind of thing. I saw that like many years ago, but it's just a nice way of looking at it. Like, yeah, this is the most important meeting and call that I have today, So it kind of reminds me of that. And again, the point about, like, if we look at today on like social media or wherever, the discussions or the quote unquote really controversial discussions and the technicalities are around like some of the things that you mentioned, do you raise your hands, raful yadayn, or not, or where do you place your hands, or the tashahhud, your finger, does it move or not, or do you lift it or raise it, or what do you do? And it's crazy, like that's where all the energy is going towards. Things that even if you looked at it from a like fiqh point of view, in a lot of the madhabs, in a lot of the schools, these aren't actually like integral components of the prayer. Like you could actually make do without them and your prayer would actually be valid. So even from a fiqh point of view, that's where our energy is going. But kind of moving away from that, we need to focus on the internal elements, right? So the khushu'. So it's interesting, like even from a Quranic narrative, like you mentioned before, from a Quranic perspective, like when Allah speaks about the prayer, a lot of the times actually when you look at the descriptions, it's about those who in their prayer, yuhafidhun or da'imun, or the most famous one, khashi'un. That's what he's talking about, like, you know, being consistent in your prayer, preserving the prayer, or having humility in the prayer. It's not really about, okay, in the prayer, you have to be to the T, you need to follow X, Y, Z rule. He doesn't even mention that. So it's quite interesting from a Quranic point of view. But I want to actually bring it to now before the prayer begins, right? Because what I feel like a huge mistake that a lot of us make is it's only after we say Allahu Akbar, then we start thinking, oh, why am I distracted for? Why can't I focus? So after we started the prayer. So before you start the prayer, what are your tips for actually focusing? So you mentioned one already, which is the mindset of the meeting, right, with Allah. What other things would you say to kind of settle down and get into the mindset of prayer?
Sure. So there's a number of things, right? So of course we can't talk about preparation for the prayer except that we talk about the wudu. And the interesting thing about the wudu is, again, the way in which we see wudu, many of us, is exactly how we're ending up seeing the prayer, because we're only seeing wudu from the perspective of the technicality, right? So we need to get these technical things done so that then the prayer can be valid. And again, a lot of the discussions around the wudu, etc., that's what where they center. But the interesting thing is, of course, that the wudu is clearly like we can observe clearly by the nature of the wudu that it is not so much about a technical preparation as it is about like psychologically, emotionally getting yourself in the zone, preparing again for this meeting. Okay. Now, one funny observation in relation to this is the fact that, especially, for example, especially perhaps in the winter time when the shorter days and then Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib come close together, many times we privately, maybe even publicly, depends, we celebrate the fact that we have maintained our wudu. So it's actually a relief to us that we don't need to do it again.
You know, they've actually got a term for this now, by the way, on social media.
What is it?
They call winter the one wudu season, literally.
Right. Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. Now that's interesting because, like, the fact that we are celebrating either, almost we feel, oh, thank God, I don't have to do it. Yeah. I will, I might even, a person may feel like they kind of feel slightly that they feel, the call of nature sort of distantly, if you like, but they don't want to go now, because if they go now, they have to do their wudu again, right? And then pray. So I'll rather pray, and maybe that call becomes stronger and you're more distracted. All right. And then, okay, and afterwards, so these things kind of are there. But I do think that in terms of your question, the wudu then needs to be seen in light of this. So a nice analogy for this is that if we're thinking about this salah as this meeting with Allah, where effectively we're entering into a sacred space, right, in which we have this kind of interaction, either individually or collectively, with other worshippers, then and we kind of maybe analogize or assume that we're coming to this royal court or palace or what have you, and that prior to entry there's a particular protocol we need to go through, right? And in certain standards. So it's like outside of this royal court or palace, we basically wash ourselves. We come as disheveled, dirty, whatever, perhaps, right? And I mean that as a result of our sinfulness, forgetfulness. And we know from, again, prophetic narrations, as well as even from the Quranic language around the wudu as well, the fact that there is an internal purification process that is fundamental to the wudu. So what we're doing is we are preparing to present our inner self, if you like, to Allah. So just as maybe before this podcast, right, I might have just made sure I was looking presentable. You certainly made sure you were looking presentable, bro. That hairstyle, it takes time to come up with that one, I'm telling you. Yeah. So the thing is, we take trouble because we don't want to look like, frankly, like idiots, in front of. We want to look presentable. We want to look neat. We want to look clean. Okay. And basically it's the same thing. But Allah, when we're standing in front of Allah in the prayer, I mean, obviously at all times, but in the prayer we're more conscious of this. He can see right through us. And so in a way, it's like, just as we sort of make ourselves up, or make ourselves presentable before we see each other go out, etc., and just when we're in the sight of other people, now that we are hyper conscious about the fact that we're in the sight of Allah, it's like, am I presenting my best inner self to Allah? And the wudu actually helps with that. That's the point of it. So it's a very powerful thing. And I think if we're going through the wudu, appreciating that as we're washing the various limbs, that we are effectively cleansing our inner self of the impurities that have resulted from the way in which we have utilized these various kind of limbs, then that's a much more powerful kind of thing. And as we know from various narrations and reports, that some of the companions and others, their awe and their I suppose even fearfulness of standing in front of Allah started becoming apparent during the wudu itself. Okay, so people could observe, that was the case, and that's why also it's discouraged to just talk about random things during the wudu, because you're preparing, right? You're getting in the zone, like an athlete, that's pacing around before they begin their race or whatever. Like, you're in the zone. You're now starting to already free yourself from interacting with anything else. I think that then, ideally, between the wudu and the salah, ideally there should, the shorter the time, the better in some ways. And certainly, although this is very difficult for us nowadays, to try and, in those moments before the prayer, then be free of our devices. Yeah. So rather than check a few messages before we then get back into it, whatever, because they stay with us. Something that we've seen, some message, or the thing that we've sent, or what have you, they stay with us. So the idea is just try and unblock our minds and hearts of all of these other things just before, so that we're not, right. If we're in all of these things right up until the point of beginning the prayer, then there's a very high chance we're going to carry them with us. So whatever we're doing just prior, whether it is a meeting, whether it's some other activity, a call with someone, some task, some project, doing stuff at home with the kids, whatever, it's trying to create, I think the wudu helps with that, obviously, and then just before that, trying to create some sort of buffer, right, between whatever we have been doing and what we're about to do. So I do kind of, strongly recommend this idea of what we might call the golden minutes, where you basically spend this sort of 60 seconds at least. You come to the place of prayer, you're standing there, arms by your sides, or maybe even sit down, and just take some time to, again, further get into the zone, calm yourself down, align your thoughts better before you begin. So this is a practice that has been reported by some in the past who used to do this. And I think that it's very powerful. And I think it's almost increasingly important today, to be honest.
Definitely.
So actually, even things like, just breathing deep breaths, calming yourself down, you feel your shoulders relaxing, thinking forward to the hereafter, thinking about the fact that this could be your last prayer. Bringing the unseen aspects of our worldview into view, if you like, see the angel of death, see, heaven and hell, imagine that the Kaaba is in front of you. Think about your blessings and what you feel grateful for, so that you can carry that gratitude into your prayer. Think about your difficulties and your troubles and where you need help, so you can carry that need with you into your prayer. Whatever it is, the point is that there's no one set of prescriptive reflections, but having that moment of reflection before you begin, and also saying the iqama as well. Many people individually, when they pray, they don't say the iqama. This is what I found when I ask people, just generally, students and those who participated in the course, and whenever I've done these kind of workshops and webinars, I found that most people, when they pray, if they happen to pray the obligatory prayer alone, then they're not saying the iqama. And I think that saying the iqama also is very helpful, because again, if you're saying it with an understanding of the words, then the phrases that we are saying there are very like they literally call us to attention. Hayya ala salah, hayya ala falah, come to salah, come to success. But the qamati salah is almost like a drum roll, actually. Salah is literally, salah has stood up. The time has come. It's almost bringing this crescendo, and then Allah, la ilaha illallah, and then obviously we begin. So all of this, I think, is helping then to prepare us, create that buffer, between whatever else has been going on, and just really trying to imagine the presence of Allah before us.
Yeah.
These are some of the key things.
Yeah. I love the concept of the golden minute. I think it's definitely something that a lot more of us can do and should do. It's like the typical example of like the prayer in the masjid, where a lot of scholars discourage, running to the prayer, right? Like, you're going to miss you're going to miss one rak'ah, and it's like the scholars say, don't run, because even if you miss a rak'ah, okay, you can make that up, but you
Yeah, sure.
can't make up the quality of the prayer, because what a lot of times what happens is you run, and we've all done this, we've all been there. You run, and then you're out of breath, and you somehow just manage to catch the ruku, and even then, like some scholars, they say you didn't even bend your back, like we spoke about. So it wasn't even done properly, and you're out of breath, and it takes you like another minute or two just to settle down, and by then 2-3 rakat have gone, and most of the prayer is done. So it's quite interesting where, like, if you did prepare for the salah in advance, like you said, the wudu, which is really important, the golden minute and all of that, then you're kind of in the best kind of state, right? And frame of mind to pray. And like with distractions, right? Because I want to talk about distractions as well, where obviously we all have distractions. Like the device, like you mentioned, is a huge distraction. With the distraction, so like, is there like one way to kind of get rid of it? And by the way, I have a theory which I wanted to share with you. I never actually said this out loud. It's just like this theory I have in my mind, right?
Oh, well, you say your theory, then we'll see what is.
Okay, cool. So my theory is, right, when it comes to like distractions in the prayer, because everybody complains, right? As soon as I say Allahu Akbar and start the prayer, that's it. I start thinking about everything under the sun. So my theory is the reason why that happens is because Salah is like one of the only times in our day, right, where we're not speaking to someone. Obviously, you're not allowed to speak to someone. You're not allowed to listen to anything else. You're not allowed to look at, read, watch, be connected, right? It's our only time where we disconnect. So therefore, when you disconnect, you have a bit of time to yourself, right? And you now have a bit of time to think about other things. Whereas if you were working or studying, you can't do that. So now that you've disconnected and you're in that state, you're in the state of, being engaged in the prayer, that's it. Now everything comes to your mind. The reason why, my theory is because outside of Salah, you never disconnected, if that makes sense. If you had taken time outside of Salah elsewhere to reflect or disconnect from time to time, then that's your time to like let your thoughts go wild. But then when it comes to Salah, you need to know now it's Salah time, it's that meeting with Allah. So that's my theory. It's not like a great theory, but it's like, would you agree with the basic premise of it?
I think what I recognize within what you're saying is the fact that like there's nothing, it seems as though there's nothing particular or visible or tangible to focus on. And so then, your thoughts kind of run wild, right? And then, of course, there is the kind of linguistic challenge, because actually, I think a lot of it is about the fact that, look, right now, simply the fact that we are talking to each other, okay, we are our mind and our ears, our mind, our brain, tongue, right? They're all kind of aligned at the moment because we're interacting with each other. We are thinking about things, right? I don't know what you're thinking about, but we are thinking about things that are almost like they're offshoots of this discussion. And then we might, while you're talking, I might be listening, something might be coming to my mind, think about, okay, well, we might bring that back into the discussion later. I mean, hearing what you're saying, listening to what you're saying, right? Trying to, derive benefit from what you're saying, right? And vice versa. And then we're in this conversation, okay? So the point is like, so it's worth analyzing this and then saying, okay, well, as far as Salah is concerned, what's actually the difference? Because I'm sure you have had this experience as well. I mean, certainly over the last year and a half now, I've done a number of webinars, okay, where I can't even see. So here, at least I can see you. I can't even see anything. All I'm looking at, I'm literally looking at the blank screen or the PowerPoint presentation that I'm flicking through, and I'm presenting for 45 minutes or an hour and talking like this. I can't see anyone, but I'm still there. I'm still engaged. I'm still talking. So what's the difference? There is no difference. The difference is, I mean, when I'm talking to, I can't see him. I just have to believe that he's there. So the question really comes down to what extent you believe that he's there. And then to what extent, again, are you trying to say something? When you're saying the verses of Fatiha or whatever you're saying, the ruku or whatever, is that what are you like? Are you actually saying something from your heart or not? That's really the key question. Because if you feel your communication, right, where actually you mean what you say and you say what you mean. And if these verses and these words have become things that we mean, right? Not just that we say, but we mean them. And that takes some work actually to sort of to sort of work that out, right? Do we actually mean this stuff? And how can I make sure that I am, whilst I'm saying these things, my like I am thinking and feeling the relevant things and emotions that relate to these particular words.
Yeah.
And I feel they're landing somewhere, like they're actually being received. Yeah. So on a webinar, when you can't see anyone, the fact that, you know, there's a little number that says, okay, this many people are here, whatever, frankly, whether it's 5 or 500, the point is that the fact that that tells you of their presence, you assume they're listening. And again, that puts the sufficient pressure on you to know now I need to communicate properly.
Yeah.
That's enough. Now, the scary thing is that knowing that of Allah isn't enough for most of us to be focused now on that and not on something else. And you know what it is that you see, in order to, like with most things, I think, right, in order to improve the prayer, you can't rely on simply doing the prayer. I can't just keep doing the prayer to improve the prayer. You've got to come out of, you've got to basically have an alternative space in which you are reflecting on it, almost practicing aspects of it, learning different components of it, listening to a discussion like this or similar, whatever, and then incrementally, step by step, bring in elements of that into your prayer, into the actual prayer itself. So just like with anything else, again, like give sort of an athletics or a sports example, outside of the actual matches and the actual games, you might do drills, right? You might do particular things that focus on a very particular aspect. Recently I started getting back into playing squash. I used to play loads when I was younger, and I got back into it. And I probably died of a heart attack a few times because it's very intense. But the point is, sometimes, for example, the guy will say, okay, I've just sort of just working with this coach at the moment, right? So he'll just say, so we just do this ghosting, yeah? There's no ball. You just have your racket. He'll say, okay, forehand. So forehand. So you run, you just ghost the forehand back. What are you practicing? Just your movement and your technique. That's one aspect. In a game, that's just one, this movement from this position in an arc to that position, those 4 or 5 steps. That's just one part of many different components of the game. But outside of the actual game, that's what you're focusing on. We need to do that with our Salah. Like, this is the thing that, and I think this is what why I've started that, and that's what we're trying to do in that course, in the course that I've developed, basically, is to say, and it's called Steps to Paradise because it's broken down into these mini steps. So let's take each of these little components, go deep into it, think about it, reflect on it, practice it, and then bring it back into the prayer. But also realize that overall, the fundamental issue is, like, really, do you believe Allah is there or not? It really does come down to that. That's what the, and this is why the Salah is so powerful. And this is why it is actually as important as it is, because what it reveals is the reality of this relationship. Because, like you said, there's no one else in this one, so you can't bluff it now. There's no bluffing. It's just you and your Lord. And so, and there's a lot for us to think about when we are on our own, in away from others, in other times outside of the prayer. When we are in solitude, like, what happens in those times, and what's our state in those times? Are we even comfortable in those times? A lot of people, I mean, I love solitude, to be honest. It's fine. Yeah. This is okay, Shabbir. Like, I'll talk. But I'd rather, I'm not saying I'd rather be alone than be doing this, but I'm
the same. Yeah, I can relate.
Yeah, alone time, reflection time, reading time, like all of that stuff. That for me is is valuable time, right? Yeah. Especially when you've got kids, and that all ends up taking a lot of sort of sanity and everything else. So I'm just saying, though, is that if the more comfortable we can be, with ourselves, with our thoughts, and with Allah, basically, in everything else that we're doing, then the easier the Salah will be. Because this is actually an important point. I think just one point I'll make here is that another way to think about Salah, okay, is in the context of a journey. So we've talked about it as a meeting, right, in sort of in isolation. But now, what's the point is, what is the connection between Salah and what happens in between Salah? Now, we know that we are the analogy or the frame of reference for the whole of our lives is this notion of a journey, right? That's why we talk, and the fact that we're trying to find our way through, Okay, so that's why we're constantly saying, guide us on the straight path.
Yeah.
Okay, which is actually the only prayer, the only supplication that is a necessary part of the salah. Any other supplication in salah is supplementary. Even Allahumma salli ala Muhammad is supplementary.
Yeah.
You know, it's very emphasized and important, but it is supplementary. So the only supplication you have to make in your salah is the request for guidance on the journey. And this is really interesting, because think about it like this. Think about it like either a long motorway journey or a mountain climb or a Formula One race or whatever you want to think about, right? In each of those things, on the motorway journey, you're going to stop at a service station. On the mountain climb, every so often you're going to stop, take rest, you know, sit, eat, recuperate, think about the objective, right? Where you're trying to get to, especially when you need to motivate yourself, right? In the Formula One race, you've got the pit stop, right? Quick sorting out of everything, reorder yourself, right? Mentally, the driver, whilst that's going on, the driver's thinking about like the end, finish line, remotivate, and then boom, go off again, right? So now, what's interesting about all these examples is that the pause and the next stage of the journey are aligned. There's a coherence between the two. What does that mean? It means that the reason why I've stopped, I'm very clear about the fact that it's to facilitate the next part of this same journey. So there's a coherence between and a harmony between the reason why I've stopped, what I'm doing when I stop, and then the next part of what I'm about to do. So the pit stop helps the next part of the journey. The stop on the mountain climb helps with the next part of the climb. The service station stops helps with the next. Obviously, it's like obviously I'm now making a really obvious point, but with the salah, you see, apply the same simple logic. The problem most of us have is that the salah doesn't feel coherent with the bits that's happening in between. It feels like this oddity. It's like we're actually leaving life, right? Just doing this sort of random exercise over there, and then kind of come back and do normal life again. So what's happening is that it's as if, you know, if Allah is not the objective of all of your life, you're going to find it difficult to make him the true objective of your prayer. That's the point.
Yeah.
Now, making the true objective within the prayer helps. So it's like a virtuous or a vicious cycle or circle, depending on which way you go. So a better salah helps the next stage of your life. The whole point of it is supposed to invite you to reflect further on what are you doing in between the prayer, and is that aligned to a higher objective?
Yeah.
Okay. Whereas if we're always coming to the salah from an activity that actually was disconnected from God altogether, then it will feel at odds. It will not be this compounding effect. It's a little bit like then in these examples where someone stops on this journey and then afterwards they go off in a completely random other direction.
Yeah.
Right? And then stop again, they go off in another random direction. They're not actually getting any. Then the stop and the journey is not aligned to the end point. This, by the way, might be this, you know, is a way to understand the significance of inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alameen. The Prophet, peace be upon him, is told to proclaim, my prayer, my sacrifice, my living and my dying are all for God, Lord of all that exists. Now, when we reflect on verses in the Quran, one way to reflect and to do this tadabbur or reflection is to ask yourself, well, what would this feel or look like if a certain component wasn't there? Now, if it said, قُلْ إِنَّ مَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ, and that was the verse, we wouldn't assume anything was missing.
Yeah.
Right? If it just said, say, my living and my dying are for Allah, yeah, Lord of all that exists. The fact that salah is there and the notion of sacrifice is there is significant, because it's almost like here's the cornerstone, here's a start, which enables you to bring the rest of your life, living and your dying, etc., all aligned. This is the significance in as-salata tanha anil fahsha wal munkar. How does salah prevent immorality and wrongdoing? I.e., what does that mean? It means align the rest of your life, right, with a sort of God-centered kind of living, and where Allah is your true objective. Again, it's because you know, you're in salah in such a way that you feel the presence of Allah, and somehow it's informing and teaching you, guiding you, so that the next part of your journey in your life, the next stage, is reflective. You know, like reflect the prayer, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is. So I think this is this is a really important thing for people to think about, because one thing I'm personally interested in, which is maybe a discussion for another day, is okay, how we talking about here alignment and harmony in one salah, to make it truly focused on Allah. But then the next part of that is, okay, well, how do I do that with the whole of my life then?
Mm.
you know. And I just
Yeah.
think that, and this is why the narrations that indicate that if Salah is in order, everything else will be in order,
Mm.
right? That's the key to paradise. Your first thing you'll be asked about. When you start to think about it like this, then you can better understand those kind of components of prayer. That why is it the case?
Yeah.
Because actually, all of the answers to almost every aspect, the fundamental aspects of how we do life are in this. They're in the prayer.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. No, I really like this point about alignment. Like I remember reflecting once on there's that verse in the Quran, Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. So literally salah, it prevents you from doing anything obscene or anything bad.
Mm.
And when you think about it, it's like what does that mean? Does it just mean during the salah, or is it outside of that? So obviously during the salah, yeah, most definitely, you know.
Mm.
But outside of that, it's interesting because when you think about it, like you were saying, the points about how salah does impact. So like even basic things like you have to pray salah on time, so you got to be punctual in other parts of your life, or the fact that in salah your gaze is fixed usually, and then like if you're able to do that in salah, then in life in general, as you're traveling, walking, you're able to kind of fix your gaze, you're able to focus. If you're able to focus in salah, you're able to focus elsewhere.
Mm.
So I think I find those parallels really interesting, how
Yeah.
salah does actually impact other parts of your life, and I feel like that's probably a lot of us don't see it that way, and we just kind of view salah, like you said, as a completely separate action. And a lot of us we don't factor in, and this is another point I did want to quickly touch on, was how a lot of us we don't factor in salah in our kind of daily routine. So when the time comes, then we're like, oh, it's salah time. You hear the adhan, and you're like, oh, it's salah time. But you never, when you woke up in the morning and you had this like plan for the day, like, oh, I'm gonna go out, I've got shopping to do, I've got errands to run, I've got work. You never thought about, oh, but what about salah time? And had we done that and had we factored it in, um, that quality of the prayer would have been better. Would you agree with that?
No, I agree. I agree. And also, I think, and it kind of comes back to what we were discussing at the beginning or towards the beginning, which is that actually, if you see this as a meeting or an appointment, then you will schedule it in.
Yeah,
So
true.
then if you're looking at your calendar,
Yeah,
you'll see all the various things you've got to do, like, and then just, it's just another entry.
very
Yeah.
true. Yeah,
So I
yeah, yeah,
think having it like that, again, it normalizes this whole experience. And this
mm,
helps a lot with people who, for example, as people maybe start to go back to the workplaces and all the rest of it, I think
yeah,
this really helps because having your salah in your kind of diaries or calendars or even your work calendars and what have you, in such a way that is just like the way you put everything else in there that you're committing to, right?
mm,
uh, then I think that helps a lot. It helps a lot. It
mm,
helps in kind of demonstrating your seriousness about it. Helps in terms of the reminder. And then also what it does is, like we've discussed, it maybe starts to align your understanding about the fact that this is another meeting, and the same etiquette that I just showed in this client meeting or this internal work meeting or whatever, in terms
yeah,
of proper communication, proper listening, not not behaving in a way that clearly demonstrated disrespect, or
mm,
speaking in a way that demonstrated disrespect. Like, we speak very fast in our prayer oftentimes, and we
yeah,
mumble our words. Even in a silent prayer, it's possible to say the words in a way that we can describe as respectful.
mm,
But I think, I mean, I don't think it's probably not too much of an exaggeration to say, I don't think most people mumble their words in such a way that if you were just to then amplify the volume, right, and to retain the speech in the same way, like, they would be embarrassed that this
mm,
is how they spoke to their Lord. When the same people will correct their own children if their children are speaking, in a way that's like, too fast, or what,
yeah,
we are concerned about that for our kids, that they should speak properly, communicate well, come across
mm,
well, etc. But then we ourselves don't do that, and we do, and we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't speak disrespectfully, without proper pronunciation, etc.
mm,
With whoever else. If we're taking these other interactions seriously. That's, by the
yeah,
way, a really interesting point on the issue of tajweed, right?
mm,
So tajweed again is seen as a very technical kind of thing, but what's the actual point of it? The point of it is just pronounce the words properly. So I just interpret it as a form of respectful communication,
yeah,
right? It's out of respect for the one whose words you are reciting,
mm,
and out of the and whether that's for the Quran or obviously just a proper pronunciation of any of the phrases of prayer, or even in dua, in general supplication in or out of the prayer,
yeah,
we
mm,
just asking and speaking in a way that is appropriate. Like, the
yeah,
thing is, a lot of this stuff is like, it really is common sense 101, to be honest. But because we don't reason and we don't think about our relationship with our Lord in sort of, frankly, what I would just describe as normal terms, this is actually what ends up messing a lot of things up.
True.
You know, it's
Yeah.
it's become, and this is why a lot of people feel a disconnect. Either by being a believer, or it's almost like they feel more disconnected from the world, right? Or uncomfortable in the world. And obviously there's a level of that, call it disconnection, discomfort, that's appropriate, but I'm talking in a way that's maybe not helpful from the perspective of us being in society as we need to be and we should be. Or they're so involved in so involved in the world that they become, you know, uncomfortable or unable to then relate with the prayer. So these things need to be, you know, it just needs to all come together. Inshallah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I completely agree with you. I mean, like you said, a lot of those things are basic. Like, if you want to put it that way, they are quite basic, or if you want to call it common sense. But I guess it's just more around you know, like understanding why you do what you do. Like you said, Tajweed and all of those things. I'm really conscious of time, so I guess on like one final note. I mean, in terms of like final, I'm going to ask you for some final like tips, because I know there's so many things you could have mentioned. Some final like practical tips for the listeners and viewers to inshallah take away, as well as factoring in the distraction element, because like I think one thing that we've probably established now from our conversation is you could be wearing the best clothes, you could be in front of the Kaaba in Mecca listening to the best Imam recite, but you could be completely disconnected because you're not actually there. So what would be your like final tips, final few tips to help someone
I'll mention sort of two things, right, fundamentally. So number one is it's more outside of the prayer, and I think the question that everyone needs to ask themselves is, what activities or processes are we involved with that help us to increase our knowledge and appreciation of our Lord? Okay, you know, again, when we talk about knowledge and seeking knowledge, again, I feel that we talk about it in ways that I'm not sure most people can really truly relate to, right? The point of this ilm, this knowledge, is to know your Lord. That's the point of all of this. Okay.
Yeah.
So are we? I suppose the tip is, or the recommendation to myself and to everyone is, be more curious about who your Lord is. Don't take it on assumption from a ABC person, but look at the two fundamental sources of information that reveal to us who he is, and that is, even according to his own words, his revelation and his creation. So I think that most of us are familiar with the idea of, okay, we need to ponder the Quran, understand the Quran, but I want to be really specific to say that the point of doing this tadabbur is to gain a better appreciation of who Allah is. Again, it's not just about like just sort of to derive just sort of random insights, yeah, basically. But it's specifically, one should be constantly ask oneself, what am I learning more about the nature of Allah, who Allah is, and his expectations of me? I.e., it's very much about the true relationship. Similarly with creation, like, you know, many people, they might not be particularly interested in, you know, the physical aspects of creation, etc., in their own right. But when you actually see these things for what they are, which is the handiwork of the Lord of the heavens and the earth, then it's different. Because now even as a young person, if I'm studying biology, physics, chemistry, math, whatever, right, then, or history even, whatever it might be, then I can look at all of these things, and and my curiosity, my interest is, I want to know how Allah has designed this. You see?
Yeah.
So I myself, I used to hate physics when I was a kid, right? But more recently, I might read every so often things that relate to the universe, physics, etc., etc. But what's driving me to do that is, and it's much more of an intrinsic motivation now, as opposed to, you know, pass some exam, right? Which is, I'm more interested to understand the nature of my Lord, because actually in looking at the ayat of Allah in creation, you understand a lot about him. Yeah. This is vital. All of these things are vital. Why? Because then when you come to your prayer, you have a better sense of who you're in front of. If your knowledge and appreciation of Allah has never changed. Like, this is really important to think about. What do we know about Allah today that we didn't know 6 months ago, or a year ago, or 3 years ago? If basically what we can say about him is the same now as it was before, clearly we're not growing, right?
True.
Clearly the relationship's not moving, you know?
Mm.
So I think that's a really critical point, and we should all therefore ask ourselves, what activities or processes are we involved in that's genuinely increasing our knowledge and appreciation of Allah? Because we carry that into the salah will be a lot more powerful. And then as far as in the salah is concerned, then I think there is just no substitute, right, for doing two things. Number one, memorizing the meanings of the words that we say in the prayer. But, and I think this is something which is, I mean, I haven't heard recommended before, but I strongly recommend it personally, which is practice saying the translations of the words in the prayer outside of the prayer, basically. Yeah.
Right.
So the translations of the words that you say in the prayer, say them outside of the prayer as if you're offering this as a communication to Allah. So for example, even with Surah Al-Fatiha, if we can say outside of the prayer, practice being like actually emotionally kind of communicating in the name of God, the Lord of mercy, the giver of mercy. All praise belongs to God, Lord of all that exists, the Lord of mercy, the giver of mercy, master of the day of judgment. Guide us on the straight path, the path of those whom you favored, not of those who've earned your anger, nor of those who've gone astray. May it be so, right? Now, the thing is, again, a lot of people could not just say it like that from beginning to end automatically or naturally. Now, check this. If you can't do it in English, you're never going to do it in Arabic. If you can't do it in English, you're never going to do it in Arabic. What I mean is, if you can't say it in English fluently, with feeling, you're never going to do it in Arabic because you don't spend your days thinking in Arabic, talking in Arabic. So you can't do it in the language that you're most familiar with. You're never going to do it in Arabic. But if you are able to do this, so even with Subhana Rabbil Azim, how perfect is my Lord the Majestic? How perfect is my Lord the Majestic? How perfect is my Lord the Majestic, the Supreme? Now, it's practicing saying that in English, and then saying the Arabic, automatically what was Subhana Rabbil Azim, Subhana Rabbil Azim, Subhana Rabbil Azim becomes Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, etc. Naturally, because now you're relating to it. But if you can't do it in English, or you're not, and it might feel awkward. People, I think, feel very awkward sometimes in doing some of these things because it just feels like, I mean, some people even feel like this is some sort of sellout exercise. How dare I, do any of this in English? But this is the language that Allah, number one, understands. Number two, more importantly, created. Okay, so there's nothing inherently wrong with it or evil about it. Okay,
Absolutely.
we need to get over that one in our head. But seriously, it's very important, because if you never get to a point where you're meaning what you're saying if you can't simultaneously process the translation or the meaning of what you are actually saying in the prayer, right? And then you can the tone is really important, right? In all forms of communication right now, if I just monotonously said everything to you, the same words, like the impact will be like reduced by 90% plus, right? Or your conviction about the extent to which I mean what I'm saying, even if I'm saying the same words. Whereas if I apply some tone because I care about what I'm saying and I know what I'm saying, at least I understand what I'm saying, then it's a whole different story. So this is really critical. Are you communicating with Allah in such a way that you think that He would feel that you really were investing yourself in that communication? That's the key. That's the key. So I think this as a practice point is massive, I think.
Yeah, huge. I think that's a really, really good point to end on, the internal and the external aspects there. Just a quick one. If is there a website where if someone wants to find out more or enroll on one of your courses?
Yeah, so there's transformmyprayer.com. I haven't given it too much attention most recently, but yeah, you can see there that some information. You can basically drop your email address in if you want to be informed about upcoming courses. I don't have a fixed date for any upcoming course at the moment, but inshallah will probably be one before the end of this year. We're in 2021, by the way, for anyone.
Because there's going to be people watching it later as well.
Yeah, inshallah, yeah, perhaps, yeah. So that's where to look it up, basically, and
Inshallah. Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. I found this really, really useful, and hopefully a lot of the viewers and listeners will find it useful likewise and be able to implement, inshallah. Jazakallah khair to Brother Iqbal for joining us on the IlmFeed podcast, and to our viewers, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you benefited, inshallah. Do share, do subscribe, and we hope to see you again back on another podcast, inshallah. Take care of yourselves. We'll end it here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Salam.